Hi, thank you for joining today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Colossians. We are continuing in chapter 4, and today we're in verse 14. Go ahead, open up your Bibles, read from verse 7 all the way down through the rest of the chapter so you can get the full literary context of what we're talking about today. Today we got a short one. Verse 14 says this: Luke, the physician, sends you his greetings, and also Demas. So Luke and Demas are the last two names of the people that Paul is going to mention who have been with him in prison in the prison in Rome. So the first two, he's sent out to be his messengers to come to Colossae with the letter and share information. Then the next three were Jewish believers who were still with Paul in Rome saying their greetings. And these last three are also non-Jewish or Gentile believers who are still with Paul in Rome sending their greetings. So today we see the last two of that last grouping. And it comes to us as Luke and Demas. So the first thing we learn is Luke is a beloved physician. So we know that. We understand that. It's the only place we understand that. In fact, Luke is only mentioned in the Bible 3 times. So you think, oh, I know Luke. I've heard of him before. But he's actually only mentioned in the Bible 3 times. He's actually mentioned in the same 3 places that this other person, Demas, is also mentioned. So they're both mentioned 3 times, which is interesting because it's less than we see Aristarchus. It's less than we see Tychicus. So we recognize that Luke, as far as his mentions in the Bible, doesn't seem to be much more important than all the other disciples of Paul. But we know him because he's the writer of the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. He's also the writer of the book of Acts. So while we don't see his name mentioned much, we actually see him a lot throughout the New Testament. His presence as a writer is there. And additionally, we recognize that in the book of Acts, though he doesn't name himself, he's like John, who doesn't name himself in any of his writings. Luke doesn't name himself in any of his writings. And so we don't see his name, but we see him because in several places, in at least 3 different places, we see that the writer of Acts, Luke, he talks about how they were doing this and they were doing that when he talks about Paul and his disciples. But in every so often he throws in, and then we went here and we did this, showing that he was there with them. So we see that Luke actually was there doing these things with Paul as a disciple of Paul's, if you would. And so we see him writing that book of Acts and that book of Luke so that we have all that information. It comes to about a quarter of the New Testament comes from Luke. So he's a great man. We know a lot about him. But this other person we don't really know much about. His name is Demas. And interestingly enough, like I said, he is mentioned the same 3 times that Luke is mentioned. That's here in Colossians, also in the book of Philemon, and also in the letter to Timothy, the second letter, so 2 Timothy. Now, what's interesting is that Philemon and Colossians were written at the same time by Paul and were delivered at the same time to the city of Colossae. So that was written at the same time, somewhere between 60 and 62. And we see Demas and Luke, and we see Paul working with them. But then we see the names mentioned again in the last letter to Timothy, which is the last letter Paul writes right before his death. And that's probably somewhere between 64 and 66. So somewhere in that time period, we see this huge difference in Demas. Because in Philemon, Paul calls Demas a fellow worker. But in 2 Timothy, we see Demas is called something else. He says, Demas has deserted me because he loved the world, and he's returned to Thessalonica. So we know he's from Thessalonica. That's where he returned to. But obviously, he left the ministry. He left the ministry. Now, did he leave the faith? It doesn't say that, but he left the ministry. It hints that maybe he left the faith because Paul says that he loved the world. And we know that throughout the Bible, we're told that we can't have 2 masters. We can choose God, we can choose Jesus, we can choose the world. We can't have both. So Paul's being pretty clear that he's saying that Demas loved the world. So it implies that he's left the faith as well. So what's the lesson from Demas? The lesson from Demas is, there are lots of people who might be in the church, working with the pastors, with leadership, doing some great things, but they may not really be Christians. There may come a time, as time comes down the line, that they leave. And so a Christian never leaves. We finish the race. We complete the time that we have here on earth as faithful servants of Jesus Christ. Anytime we leave that, we've never been Christians to begin with. So that's what the Bible tells us. Because if we were Christians, we would never have left. That's what we read in 1 John. So we know that there are many of those around us right now who may look like a Christian, sound like a Christian, talk like a Christian, do Christian things, but they may not be saved. And so it's important for us to recognize that as we go through our Christian lives. We don't want to be one of those people. So we want to work out our salvation. We want to test ourselves and make sure we're in the faith. So with that, that takes care of Luke and Demas. So thank you for joining me. If you have any questions today, go ahead and put them in the comment section below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day, and God bless you.